you have a brilliant idea. Everyone has a brilliant idea. And as soon as you realize you have this brilliant idea, I bet the first thing you're thinking is, this is going to be successful. Everyone's going to love this. I know I'm right. This solution is going to make a difference to everyone that's ever had this problem. Let's move full speed ahead and don't look back. Let's go. Everyone's going to want this. Either you've experienced this before or you've heard other people with similar type of comments. And you know, in other industries, that might work. If you have a good product that you can make, you know how to make it, you know people want it, you can just go sell it, right? But the healthcare industry is a different beast in its own right. So in the healthcare industry, you need to stop and slow down. Validate your assumptions. Running on those emotional fumes, the excitement of what's going to happen is great to keep things moving. But remember that really understanding the market, understanding your place and the product and what you're going to do with that is valuable to move things forward. So I wanted to start with this landscape picture because it's nice and calming and settling and looks really pretty on a fall day. The first impression of your landscape is the impression you get, and all the pieces that build up to that is what makes it into the landscape. But looking into the different aspects of what is part of that picture will help you set yourself up for success. And so we are going to talk through the different pieces to help build a landscape. So the importance of knowing your market. Without the knowledge of your market, it's very likely that you won't get any funding, and it's very likely that your product will fail. I haven't checked the statistics lately, but last I knew it was about 10% of pharmaceutical products that start their clinical trials don't make it out of the clinic, right? So are you going to be the 1 in 10 that succeeds? So you know, knowing your market, knowing your customer, knowing the patient that's involved. How do you get started in knowing your market? Exploring your mountains and valleys, looking at your product from different angles, you know, starting with that big picture and then focusing in on the different parts of it. And a couple of key things to mention up front is solving a real clinical need. You'll hear this unmet need portion come up regularly throughout the presentation today. Are you solving a need that is present in the clinic today, present in the OR today, present in the treatment suites today? And are you understanding your patient population and how they fit together with that need? And considering barriers to adoption, that's a jargon right there. What are the things that could go wrong or the things that you need to work through in order to be successful? And thinking about all of the different aspects of your product development process and of the marketplace to better understand what you need to do to be successful. And we'll talk about a few examples and reasons why, or large organizations that tried to do things and failed because they didn't know all of the pieces. And it's hard to know everything that's going to be involved in understanding your landscape, but here, we'll just give you some examples. So first one, inhaled insulin. Sounds like a great idea, right? You're avoiding injection. There's a huge diabetic market. You know, there's one of the billions from the market size perspective. This product called Exubera was developed by Pfizer and Nectar Therapeutics. The interesting story here is that although patients were interested in having an inhaled insulin product, the language on the website said that the patients thought it looked like a bong and were not interested in using it. There were some other disadvantages as well. It was just unwieldy and hard to manage. They ended up having some clinical issues related to lung function, which caused a bigger problem for the product. But just thinking, how comfortable is the patient when they're using this product? Do they feel good about using the product? And is it a situation where they can almost look forward to their therapy through the experience? So this product was forecast to bring in about $1.5 billion. And when they discontinued it, they ended up at about $4 million per quarter is where they were at. And they took a $2.8 billion write-off for not selling this product anymore. So they had a big hit for their organization for this product. The next one, which is super cool, I have to say, the robotic wheelchair. I've seen one of these, given that I worked at J&J, I saw one in person work, walking upstairs. This is a wheelchair which allows people that are mobility impaired to be able to get up staircases, which mobility is a huge unmet need in that patient population. So you can see the value in that. This was developed by Dean Kamen, who you know from the Segway and some other technology that he developed and put in place. The issue was with this one is that they charged $26,100 for this wheelchair, which people that are on Medicaid can't afford to pay out of pocket. Medicaid decided that there wasn't enough unmet need for this patient population to reimburse $26,000 for this wheelchair. And so the product was discontinued because of the poor sales. They couldn't continue to be profitable with the organization by selling this product. So these are big organizations. Like I said, Johnson & Johnson was involved, and Dean Kamen, big funder, big successes in other areas. But things happened with regard to the product that that we'll talk about it today are things that you need to consider when you're thinking about developing your product. And one way to do that is through a situation analysis. Because the healthcare markets are complicated, those of us in the marketing and business world like to use frameworks. So there's a couple of frameworks that we've worked into the presentation today. The first one we'll talk about is the 5 C's. And if you go Google 5 C's or business case and situation analysis, some people use different C's, and that's okay. These are the C's that I like to use because I think for the work that we do, it's a good way to do it. And the situation analysis gives you more of a macro view of the market that you're in and the landscape that you're working in. So the 5 C's, the first one is company. And the question there is, who's developing the product? Who are you? Who are you working with? Who are your partners? Who are you connected to? And what advantages do you have? Do you have the technology? Do you own the IP? Do you know how to make it? Are you able to manufacture it? Are you vertically integrated so that you can produce it, get it out the door, and get it to the patients? The next one I like to cover is a category or climate. So what are the current conditions of the sector that you're in? What's happening in the world? What are people talking about? A good example here is with EpiPens. If you were to launch an epinephrine auto-injector right now, you're going to get a lot of scrutiny. So what's happening in the outside space with regard to the category that you're working in? The next one is the customer. And in healthcare, the customer can take lots of flavors. The customer is usually the person that will pay for the product. So think about the hospital or the clinic that's actually going to approve the payment for the product. But sometimes you want to work the payer into that conversation. But think about like a financial or a business transaction with this person. The consumer, again, for healthcare can vary. But the consumer, a lot of times, is the person that's using the product. It can be a patient, it can be a doctor, it can be a caregiver. So it can be like a mother or a father or a spouse or a good friend who's using the product to help the patient. Nurse, technicians. There's lots of users in the healthcare space. And then the last one is competition. So, and I would recommend you go broad with regard to competition. Who else is making the same kind of thing I am doing? Who is making adjacent things to what I am doing, adjacent products, adjacent types of treatments, types of therapies? And what are other people doing? What kind of research are they doing in that space? What unmet needs are they finding? And how are they defining the market? Learn as much as you can from the other organizations. One of the tips on your pages is to, for public companies, is to look at the annual reports. A lot of times they'll give you an overview of what they're working on, what they think is important right now, because they're required to by law. So it's public information. Take advantage of it. What I'd like to do is go through an example. This is a real-world example that I heard of recently to to kind of give you a sense of how this works. I was made aware of this novel, here, this is the jargon that I pointed to Cheryl's on 2 pages, or 2 in the title, Novel POC Allergy Test for PCPs. So it's Novel Point of Care Allergy Test for Primary Care Physicians. So an organization had an idea. It was a microfluidics company, and they had the ability to test small volumes of sample for allergy testing. And you've heard a lot about microfluidics and small volumes of testing with Theranos in the news lately, so I'm sure you're familiar with that space. But on the surface, it sounds like a great idea. Small volumes of sample, bringing the testing to primary care physicians. So when you go in for your annual checkups or you see your doctor that you're very familiar with, do the allergy testing right there. They get it taken care of. You have that relationship with them. It's all good. They can help you interpret the results. Sounds like on the surface, it sounds like a good idea. But let's go through the C's and see what happens in this situation. So from a company perspective, it's a microfluidics company. They have that expertise. They have experience in healthcare. They know how to test small volumes. They know how to make the equipment. They know how to run the reagents through. Check. Category and climate. There's a high interest in microfluidics right now. There's been a lot of work done in the healthcare space and in the popular press. People are talking a lot about it. There's a need for point-of-care testing. There's a need for being able to decrease the time from a diagnosis or a suspected diagnosis to providing some useful information to the patients. So we get a check here as well. On the customer, payers are interested in reducing the need for specialists. So if I can pay my primary care physicians their standard fee, which is generally less expensive than the specialists, I would prefer that. Let me pay my general pediatrician or my general physician to do this test versus sending to a specialist, which incurs additional costs from the test, from the time with the clinician. So they get a check on this box here. From the consumer perspective, primary care physicians are not prepared to perform allergy testing. And there's a lot in that statement, so I'll take a minute there. They're not trained in diagnosing allergies. They haven't the experience of interpreting diagnostic testing to say if someone is allergic or not. They have, in the past, forwarded their patients to their friend who they went to medical school with, and they like to be able to continue to refer patients to for the clinic across the hall or across town because they have a good working relationship. The clinic itself is not approved to have a diagnostic test in the facility. So there's a CLIA certification is a certification that you're required to have in order to have a diagnostic test facility in your office. If you don't have the certification, you don't have a way to run these tests. You don't have a room to put the box that you have to put on a counter to run the test. You don't have a technician that is skilled in running tests. So you see, like, there are lots of questions that you need to ask from the primary care physician to see how is this going to affect their cultural climate, their clinical culture, and what's going to happen for them that's going to be different than what's happening today. And maybe on the surface, we give them an X because of all those questions that I posed, but you do some research and you say, well, you know what? These initially were barriers, but if we make these few changes, we can overcome these barriers and it's still a good idea. So, so just because you get an X doesn't mean you can't move forward. It's just there's some more work to be done. And then on the competition side, your competition is really the well-trained, experienced allergy clinics with trained physicians, trained nursing staff, trained diagnostic testing staff that know how to do this already. And so you're essentially taking work away from them. And so what are they going to say about it? At the next national conference on allergies, because there's a national conference on everything, right? The next conference, are they going to support this technology, or are they going to come up with reasons why this is not good for patients? So what's the dynamic that fits into that situation as well? So the result of this is the company had to reevaluate their position and decide if they were going to move forward because of these barriers that that came up in the conversation, they, you really need to determine if these problems are insurmountable or if it's something that you can overcome. So the next framework, the 4 Ps and the R, patients, physicians, although clinicians, I like to say, because a physician is not always going to be the clinical contact for you. Your provider, your payer, and your regulator. I've got FDA in here, but it could be through Europe, South America, Asia, depending on where you're launching. There's other organizations, which I think in your notes I have some of those written down. And so you're striving to understand the 4 Ps and the 1 R will help you make a more successful product. And I say striving to understand because we gave examples previously of the inhaled insulin and that really cool mobility tool for people that can't get around. They tried really hard to understand their marketplace and what was going to happen. And still there was unanswered questions, right? So you strive to learn to understand these better, to make an improved product. So we'll go through each one of these with an example. So I'll describe each one and I'll give you an example. The reason why we're talking about the provider, the payer, the regulator is because of those other pieces of the picture that with only those pieces in place can you have a product that will be sold and used and clinically beneficial. So the first question is, who's your patient? It seems like a simple question, but understanding more about who they are, what's their disease, the definition of the disease, do they have comorbidities, do they have other conditions associated with their disease that you need to keep aware of or be aware of? Where are they in their disease progression? Is this a new diagnosis for them? Is this something they've had a long time and you're going to be a sort of a rescue therapy for them? Where are they located? Are they, northern climes? Are they around academic facilities? Are they in rural populations? Where are they? And how are they connecting to the healthcare system? What are the emotional connections to the disease? Is this something embarrassing? Is there a stigma in the general population about people with this condition? Is it popularly talked about, or is it something that most people know about, like Alzheimer's? Everyone knows about Alzheimer's now, right? So, so asking a lot of questions about just who your patient are, who is your patient, what's your population like? The second one there, what do they need now? What's their unmet need? You'll see unmet need is going to come up a few more times. What problem are you trying to solve? The old analogy is it's a hammer looking for a nail, right? So do you have a therapy or a treatment or something that sort of you happen to cross in the lab and you say, what can we do? What's something in the healthcare world that we can apply this to? That can work, but make sure that you're approaching the condition through the understanding of what the unmet need is for that condition. What problem are you really solving? Who else is involved in their treatment decisions? Are there affinity groups that support this type of patient group? Are there family members and caregivers that are key in their care and their long-term prognosis? And then the last one, what's their access to treatment, or how are they able to manage? Is this something they have to go every week to get a treatment? Is it something that they can, get their drugs mailed to them from the pharmacy and they don't have to go see their physician except, every once a year when they go for a checkup? Do they have access to the hospitals? Is it easy for them to get to the hospital? With the Uber system, there are several car services that are being put in place for medical transport of people to get from their home to the clinic. You hear for certain types of diseases, and certain types of clinics, their no-show rate for their clinic appointments are not because people forgot about it or because they were busy that day. It's because they couldn't get there. And so helping them to get to the clinic and make that happen. And then with regard to access to the treatment, what's the sort of the financial burden on them? And adding another cost of a treatment or adding another therapy, is that going to make a positive impact on their financial burden or a negative impact on their financial burden? And we were talking a little bit over here about what in the future will you be able to save them from, and justifying that payment now will save you in the future. So lots of questions around patient. So for the infusion drug example, so time since diagnosis, for this particular drug I'm thinking of, it's these patients have had this condition for a while. They are looking for help. They are progressing in their disease, and they're getting scared because this disease will have an impact on their the quality of life as they move forward. And so having a drug that will help them to maintain their disease where they are today is a huge need for them. The infusion experience to date, this is the first time they take the drug might be the first time they've had an infusion, but it's a monthly treatment, and so they'll have to come back for an infusion once a month. So thinking about frequency of treatment, how often do you have to repeat your dose or your stimulation or the activity? What's their clinic experience? How is it easy for them to come in and out of the clinic? Who's in the clinic with them? Is it a specialty clinic or is it a primary care clinic? And these guys are relying on help. They're at a point in their disease progression where their mobility is impaired and it's difficult for them to move around, and so having help getting in and out is important for them. And there's a pretty active affinity group, and so they're able to get input from others that are on the drug and participate in the decision making around, do I want to start this drug or not? And there are, as are with many pharmaceuticals, there are some risks associated with using the product, and so they're going to find information on public sources about the risks associated with the product, and they will have to decide, is the benefit of this product worth the risk to me? Next, physician-centered questions. Or clinician, I should say, clinician-centered questions. Who are the clinicians involved? Are they hospitalists? Are they specialists in a certain area? Cardiologists, nephrologists, endocrinologists? Are they a subset of a specialty? How many are there? What's their world like? Are they involved in clinical trials, or is that not something that is typically, how active is the clinical trial activity in their specialty? And what's the unmet need for them as well? So there's the clinical unmet need for the patient, but there can also be a slightly different unmet need for these physicians. Does your product cause them any problems? Or is it fit smoothly into a phrase that's been coined of their clinical culture? Is it easy for them to use? Or is it avoiding problems for them or avoiding issues for them with their patients? What are their demographics? Are they researchers typically? Are they the people that you would target? How long have they been in their career? Are they early adopters? Will they try something new, or do they need to see that everyone else has tried it before they do? Because some specialties have, individuals have those characteristics, but some specialties are a little bit more open to trying new things. Like oncology, for example. Oncology, there's a huge number of clinical trials, and people are trying as much as they can to avoid or to make a difference with cancer patients. And so as a group, they're more open to new therapies. And now, how are they influenced? Are they influenced by the American Medical Association? Are they influenced by their own specialties association? who are the key opinion leaders in that space, and have they previously said that this is never going to work, and therefore everyone's sort of falling in line. And then the dynamics for the clinicians. Are they a diagnosing clinician? Are they the treating clinician? How are they involved in the product? Is it the patient coming to them for the first time? Or are they receiving it from someone else? And basically trying to understand a little bit more about who they are and what's involved in their world. So for the drug, so their experience with other drugs will influence their perspective. So if they had patients on other products that they had problems with, or a lot of times, especially in the surgery world, the medical device and surgical world, you heard, "in my hands" is a phrase that people use a lot. So in my hands, this device works really well. Or in my hands, I prefer this other product for this situation. It's because that's their own experience with it, and they feel that they will do a better job with that. Personal example, my mom needed a hip replacement. I had been working for DePuy at J&J, who's been in the news about their hip replacements, but so I asked her, like, who's your doctor? What kind of device are they going to put in? Tell me the name of the product. I want to know what they're going to install. And I called the sales rep from DePuy. I got a hold of him through my connections at the company, and said, tell me about Dr. Johnson. He wants to use this Stryker hip, but I've been at DePuy for all this time saying how good the DePuy products are, so, how does that resonate? And on top of that, her insurance only allowed her to go to this one surgical practice for her treatment. And so I talked to him about the surgeon, and he said, you know what? In his hands, that Stryker product is going to be really good for her. He's done hundreds and hundreds of these, does them every day. For her to ask him to do something else is the wrong thing to do. So, think about what are they used to doing, and how does that influence the clinical outcomes? And her hip's doing well. So, shift in patient care from specialists to generalists. What's happening in their space, and how are they being influenced? And so, moving from being solely treated by a specialist in that disease to shifting the treatment of those patients sort of downstream to the primary care physicians, or the other way around. That specialists are saying, look, I'm going to start asking for referrals for this specialty clinic that we run 2 days a week. If you have patients with this condition, send them to us. So think about those dynamics. So next up is provider. Okay, so provider is kind of think of it like where the place that this stuff is happening, right? So the hospital, the clinic, providing access to the treatment itself. So who is the provider? Is it, and while in saying that the place, there's always a person, right? So you might be going to a hospital, but there's going to be an individual that you have to think about at that hospital that is your provider, that is who you're thinking about. So is it the clinic manager at your physician, primary care physician office? Is it the administrator at a hospital? Is it the chair of the technology review committee that's going to evaluate your product and determine if it's going to be something that they will adopt in their facility or not? Is it an infusion clinic manager for an infusion drug question and the dynamics that might be on their plate? Are they part of an accountable care organization, an ACO? Are they connected to other hospitals that are making decisions about that same kind of care? And how are the learnings shared within the organization? Kaiser is the example. What's the ACO? Accountable Care Organization. So it's a group of hospitals, facilities, healthcare providers that kind of come together to share data and to provide better care to the patients based on the information they have. And part of that becomes a GPO, a group purchasing organization, is another version of that, where groups of hospitals, facilities, clinics get together to try to reduce their costs. So they look at it from a clinical efficacy perspective, and they look at it from a cost perspective. So Kaiser is in California is well known for this. Cleveland Clinic organization in the Ohio area, and arms reaching out, and partners to some extent. The organizations that are coming together as well. But Kaiser is well known for studying a condition in a facility and demonstrating how doing something slightly differently will reduce time, improve outcomes, make it less expensive, and then they transfer those learnings to the rest of the hospitals in the organization. And so thinking about how the hospital is connected. Unmet needs, clinical needs. In thinking about an unmet clinical need from the hospital perspective, thinking about infection reduction or reducing length of stay for patients in the hospital, decreasing procedure time. Think about scheduling and costs and sort of the interaction with the patient while they're at the facility. What are their goals? Is it for-profit hospitals? Are they nonprofit hospitals? How are they incentivized? Do they get paid by, basically, do they reimburse per procedure? There's this new bundling of procedures that's relatively new, where they get paid sort of per episode of care, and everything gets rolled in together. So thinking about all the costs and the factors that are involved there. What about their expenses or costs? How do they track expenses? How do they track costs? Is the service line that you're going to, is that a cost center or is that a profit center for the facility? Are they making money? Are they losing money? Are they trying to squeak out every penny possible? So different areas of the hospital have different sort of financial pictures associated with them. And then the dynamics, the clinical culture. Can you fit this into what they're used to and the things that they do? What are they frustrated with? Will they get frustrated by using this product? They won't use it. It's got to fit right in. And it's got to fit into their comfort level of what they're comfortable with already versus trying to make them comfortable with something new. You can do it, but it takes more work and more effort to make that happen. So for the infusion drug, the prevalence of infused therapies influences the attention giving to patients with certain conditions. So you can put the biologics products in here, the EPOs and the other products that are like all this infused, like everything's infused now. Like, it's so expensive for us to infuse these patients. They sit here for 3 hours, and they're just they're taking up space, and the time for the nurses that have to monitor these patients. Think about what the attention that's given to your condition or the treatment that you're talking about. And then the overall procedure or the infusion cost must be considered. Do they need a special chair to sit in during their infusion? Do they need a nurse watching them the whole time? Do they have any follow-up testing that has to be done every time they come in? Do they have to do blood work? What's involved with the entire procedure when they come in? Payer center questions. Whose favorite? Finance, right? As researchers, you're like, to talk about the finance piece of it, but you have to figure out how you're going to get paid. Here, the unmet need for payers can be slightly different. The current therapies that they have available today, are they really expensive? Their unmet need is reducing the cost of treatment for the patient. The current standard of care for treating that patient type, does that give them 20 years of good, healthy life after diagnosis? Or are they in and out in the hospital for the rest of their lives? What's their treatment pathway look like? And how, as a payer, do I have to look at someone and say, well, now that I know they have this condition, it's going to cost this and this and this and this. If I can reduce the cost of that for the rest of their lives, that's going to make a difference for me. Their unmet needs. Feeds to the next point of like where you're planning to launch. A lot of people look at the US first, and so you have to think of CMS, which should really be CMMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is listed in your resources. Are they going to pay for this product? Once the patient, what age are your patients essentially, and when does that payment start? Or what considerations do the private insurance companies have for the expenses of that patient? In other countries, there are other dynamics with regard to payment. So is there a national payment system? Do you have to basically get approved for in their national for national coverage? Like in China, for example, there's a tiers of hospitals that people go to and tiers of different types of insurance. And for the world I know in medical device, the patients will actually pick the product and pay for it out of their pocket. So they're given sort of an option list of which products that they want for spine surgery in particular. And do you want the premium one? Can you afford that? Or is the sort of bread and butter basic system, they'll all work, but you get to pick which one based on how much you can pay for it. So, the where do you plan to launch question pushes you into a whole another set of discussions around what's the situation analysis, what's the payer landscape like in that country, and then reflect all of the other questions that we've already been talking about, reflect that on that marketplace. So, for drugs, there's something called J codes, which you have to get J codes for some products for FDA approval or for payment. Being on formulary is when the insurance company puts you on its approved list, essentially. So if you're not on formulary, you're less likely to get used. I had to look this up because I forgot what the acronyms were, but Healthcare Common Procedure Coding System, called HCPCS, which is a system that they use to help define different procedures. And so each procedure has a CPT code, which is a current procedural terminology. It's a CPT code, that's just what I know. And those, like digging into each of these different kinds of areas will help you know what exists today, what can be paid for today. So you have to look at what coding is available. Regulator center questions. Their unmet need is this something better than what's out there today? Are we going to improve patients' livelihood, patient quality of life, improve their condition, their disease? Where are you planning to launch? This is a big question too. We know of FDA in the US. In Europe, you have to get a CE mark, which is the Conformité Européenne. How's that? Bad. It was bad. It's CE, yeah. The CE mark in Australia is TGA, is their FDA. It's their Therapeutic Good Association. I know the acronyms, but I had to look up the real names of these things for you guys. In Japan, it's the MHLW, the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. People say JFDA, if you hear that. So looking at the regulatory requirements in each country that you're looking for. What are the dynamics there? What's their approval process? I know in Japan and China, there's very lengthy approval processes for products, so consider that. What do you need? What's required for FDA to approve your products or to get regulatory clearance is what you call it, is regulatory clearance. And then what are you trying to demonstrate? Like what information is important to them? And there's a couple of pathways that you can take, the clinical trial pathway for drugs and for diagnostic tests. For devices, there's something called a 510K, which essentially is the name of the form you fill out. It's like that's how it was named, kind of like you do your 1040 on your taxes, same idea. 510K allows you to demonstrate that your device is substantially equivalent to a previous product that's on the market. So you demonstrate biocompatibility, equivalence, that it acts the same way as something else, and you can have a shorter time frame. But it's a PMA, is a pre-market approval, is the process you go through if you have a device that needs to have a clinical trial. And then market access is kind of what we were talking about with the payer piece of it, but the regulatory and payer sometimes go hand in hand. You have to get the market clearance or the regulatory clearance and in order to get market access. So you have to make it available and then have a way to get it paid for. So those kind of go together. And so for an infusion drug, So considerations for the trial design, do you design it with a placebo versus active or standard of care? Patient safety and efficacy with currently available treatments. What kind of side effects are you going to have? What's that profile look like? What are the considerations to be able to meet the requirements for the regulators as you move things forward? And Bill made a point earlier, is not only are they regulating the product to get clearance, is once you get your clearance, you have to demonstrate to FDA, for example, that you know how to make it the same way every time with qualified and validated equipment, training, SOPs. There's quality systems that need to be put in place to demonstrate that you can make the thing that you want to make. So we were talking earlier about, we want to be a startup or do we want to join a bigger company? If you're a startup, you have to build all of that for yourself. You have to build your quality systems and demonstrate at an FDA audit that you have control over your process. The next and last sort of two parts here are to understand two specific areas with regard to the market and your landscape. One is around market sizing. How do you figure out how big your market is? And the second is around the market research tools and tactics and approach that you would use to answer these questions that you have on your papers. So first, we're going to do a live example of market sizing. And the example is, do you want to buy a candy bar? Okay? So I know you're eating, but what I'm going to ask you to do is I would like everyone to stand up. Since this is food related, all right? So all right, so this is our total market, humans, okay? So if you eat food, I want you to stay standing. If you don't eat food, you can sit down. Oh, well, she's not currently eating food. Okay. If you generally, do you ever put food into your mouth? Okay. So, if you are not hungry right now, if you're full and you don't want to eat anything right now, you can sit down. Okay. You've already taken care of yourself. All right. If you have any allergies or aversions to anything in a Twix candy bar, you can sit down. You just don't like them, or it's not for you, or you're allergic to chocolate, If you have no cash in your pocket right now, you can sit down. If you have cash in your pocket, but you're not really interested in buying a candy bar right now, you can sit down. Okay, so you won. But the point here is that when you're starting to think about your market, you might say, it's all patients with diabetes, right? That is a target for this. It's all patients that have Parkinson's. It's all patients that have, we did, like, all patients are everyone's hungry. There's some allergies, but we can work around that. Everyone's got some money. They'll all buy candy bars. So you're like, my market is 100%. But in this silly demonstration, 1 out of 20 people was actually your target and addressable and obtainable market. So we're going to work through this a little bit for you. This funnel represents essentially the decrease of people standing, right? So all the people who eat, hungry now, allergies or aversions, have some cash, would want to buy one right now, right? That's how we identify what the market is for this candy bar. And then what we do with this is you can count the number of people. I did pretty good. I got 5% on my guess here of people that would be target users. You would lay out your total number of people, all your diabetics, all your Parkinson's, all your vagus nerve issues, all your, right? Who are all these people? All your fitness buffs, right? Go in here. And you have to figure out what are the factors involved that compress that your market size from that total market, everyone that you're considering, down to what's my actual market? Who is actually going to use my product? Who's actually going to buy my product? Who's actually going to be in a situation where they can get the product? If I was out in the hallway, I couldn't have handed him the candy bar, right? I had access to him. I knew he was my customer. And this, you can think of this chart in the funnel is sort of, it's sort of just a version of the funnel, right? And this kind of representation of your market, sometimes you might hear of a waterfall chart. It's sort of like this one kind of falls to this one, kind of falls to this one. What makes up your marketplace? And we use the funnel to understand who are all the potential users of your product, what portion of that total market that could use your product, what's the serviceable available market, what portion is accessible to you, are they available to you, what portion is available that will actually use your product. So sort of thinking to narrow that down. And you can cut this a bunch of different ways. You can cut it by disease type or physician access, and so there's ways to think about it, but you just need to be logical in your thinking. If you go into an investor meeting, or earlier we're talking that your tech transfer office might be your customer for this information, right? You go in and say, this is a $3 billion opportunity. $3 billion opportunity. This is probably not your $3 billion opportunity, okay? So we're going to do an example, product area that's close to my heart and my experience, a spinal fusion device. So it's a metal device that gets implanted into the spine to fuse vertebral bodies, yep. And it helps to basically reduce pain or reduce motion in the back. For this one, the spinal device is all people with back pain. Standing here right now, because I've been standing for a couple hours, my back's hurting. 75% of people in the US, probably worldwide, have back pain at some time in their life. So all of those people. So think about what's that total market? What's that big piece of the funnel that you're going to start to approach? And as we go through, feel free to write notes on your worksheet as we go through this. What's my available market? What's the portion that has disabling back pain? I do not have disabling back pain. I live my life. I take some drugs every now and then. I do some stretching, go to a chiropractor now and then, exercise. I'm good, okay? Of those patients that are available, how many of them access to a spinal surgeon? Yeah, right. A surgeon that can implant this product for them and help them. And do they have the insurance to pay for it? And then from there, which patients are in a serviceable available market? They've also failed conservative treatment. They have this disabling back pain. They have a treatable disc herniation. So you start to narrow in a little bit more on who those patients are, what's happened to them already, and are they able to get advice from this surgeon who they can pay for, from their consultation, to be the person that sort of pops out the end as someone that actually needs a spinal fusion. So think about that as we're talking about market sizing. You're narrowing your funnel from the big macro world of the patients that you're dealing with and narrowing them down. Some of the filters that might be used here are previous treatments. They are, this happens in clinical trials a lot, where they say, if you have had this other treatment before, you're not allowed to use this product now because it could influence the outcomes of the treatment. And so, think about what other products could be counter to the efficacy and availability and usefulness of your product for those patients. So we had all these questions about the market. Now we're going to talk about some tools to talk through how to gather the information. Wanted to give a couple of scientific examples for you to reflect on of different ways of making estimates, right? So many of you may be familiar with using optical density to approximating cell count, right? So you're using some secondary indicators to say, I think there's about this many cells in my culture, with the study that I'm working on. Or a direct count, counting the quadrants, how many cells do I see? And then you gross that up to how many, what volume of cells that you're dealing with, right? So as researchers, we should be comfortable with estimations, right? The reason why we wanted to bring this up is because the market sizing work that we've talked about already and the numbers associated with the work that you'll be doing from the marketing and business side will be estimates, and they will, I hate to say it like this, but when I was doing a lot of forecasting, I knew the only thing that was true is that I was wrong. Okay, so I'm not going to give you the exact answer because I don't know the exact answer, but I can give you an idea of what it is, and I can give you a range of uncertainty around what those numbers are. So getting comfortable with approximating and ignoring significant figures, right? It's not 4,276,172 patients. It's 3 to 5 million, right? So thinking about how you're estimating and getting comfortable with that uncertainty and using that information moving forward. So that being said, there are two ways that you can approach market sizing that we wanted to talk through. One is a top-down approach, and the other is a bottoms-up approach. And all of the approaches you're doing to gather information about the market and the size is an exercise in triangulation. You want to see if I come at it from this way, do I get to about 4 million? If I come at it this way, I'm like 5.2 million. But I'm like, all right, so I'm between 4 million and 5.5 million. I come in it this way, and I'm 3.7 million. I'm like, okay, so I'm between 3.5 and 5.5 million. I feel good about that. My three numbers came, pretty close together. So way to think about that is from a top-down approach. Here's the population with your condition. When you've defined who those people are, all these people, who's your addressable population? So we had our funnel. We narrowed it down, and it being 10% in this example. This is your addressable population. And let's say we did some price work, and they're going to spend $100 per patient per year on this product, so that my estimated market is $10 million. Okay? See how you start with your patient, you kind of get down. It's the bottoms-up approach. Physicians who treat patients with this condition. So you're starting with a different frame of reference. Let's say these physicians treat about 100 patients in the time frame we're talking about. Same price, right? We know we want to carry the same price across. Patient per year. There's about 10,000, of the target physicians, so each of them are spending the 10,000 per year. How many target physicians do I have? And then what's my estimated market? So it's looking at the market from a couple different directions in order to think about it in different ways. So taking more than one approach to sizing your market is beneficial to help you triangulate and get that rigor and that intelligence around your market numbers. Okay. Then we're going to step into the different market research tools that we talked about. And it's really a systematic way of collecting information about your project. Putting a little bit of planning in place, thinking about what is my hypothesis about where I'm going to end up, or where I'm here at A today, I want to move from a number 1 on this one to a number 2. What do I need to do to get that to move up the chain? And you can do market research to explore your C's, your market size with a funnel, which you remember, and the P's and the R, and to understand any of these areas. You can use market research. First, you want to know, why are you doing this market research? Is it exploratory? Am I just checking this out? I don't really know much about this space. I just want to know more about what's involved here. Is it descriptive? I want to better describe who is involved in the treatment of this product, better describe the patients, better describe the physicians, better describe the P's, because I kind of know what I'm doing, but I need a good definition of what is involved. Or is it causal? If I do this, is it going to impact something else in the future? is it going to change what's involved? So think about the different approaches to your market research. And then, let's see what's next here. Oh, good. And then different ways of approaching market research. It could be quantitative or it can be qualitative. So quantitative, you would have, would be very numbers driven. Usually more of like a survey. You have a large number of people. You can have them answer A, B, C, or D, answer the question. You can do some statistical analysis from the results that you get. And it can be used in a quantitative fashion to augment the information you have. Qualitative is really driven more about around individual and organizational behaviors, thoughts, emotions, perspective. And those can typically are done with smaller numbers. So, 10 people, 20 people, one person is even a good place to start, right? And get that qualitative. This is who, why, what do you feel about this? Why do you think that's the case? What if something else happened? And then primary and secondary, you guys are familiar with these terms. But we recommend that you start with secondary and even tertiary sources. Google is amazing, just saying, amazing. You can type in like anything you want and see what pops up. There's some tips in here and some ways to find PDFs and slides and things that has information in it. And even just find out what are people talking about? What do they post on WebMD about this condition? Like what patient groups are concerned about it? And can you could contact the patient group and say, I'd like to do some more research on this topic. What are your rules? Do you provide opportunities for small companies or startups or researchers or academic labs? Put whatever layer on it that makes sense to learn from your folks. So there are ways to do that. And starting with a secondary research is important to help with that intelligence question I mentioned before. So you want to know a little bit of something before you talk to people for the first time, because you don't want to waste their time. So if it's something that you're like, oh, well, you could have read that, on my practice website, with the kind of stuff that we do, and you're wasting my time by, that's not relevant to me. So do a little bit of your background research before you do the primary research. Publications that you're reading. Who's publishing on this? Call their lab. I read your study. I was really interested and intrigued to learn more about what you do. I'm trying to learn more about these patients. What can you tell me about them? There's ways to access clinicians from a free perspective. There's also a way to pay clinicians to do the research. I do a lot of that work myself, but that's expensive. You have to pay for the time. You have to give them a fair market value, which could be is a lot of times several $100s per hour that they get paid for just sitting on the phone with you for an hour. So take advantage of your resources here in Boston. So benefits of primary research: understanding your customer directly. What are they going to say about it? To help you define or refine your product. They might say, as we heard earlier, that indication, that sounds good, but have you thought about this? That might be a better way to, approach this. You'll learn a lot from that. So get out of your lab or office, talk to people. You might feel like I put a bunch of ones on my confidence sheet here, but that's exactly why you need to go talk to people. And you can use this class as an excuse. I went to learn more about, the business side of this and, the patients and talk about the P's. And so I got this question and I really wanted to talk to someone. I heard you knew something about this. Can you help me improve my knowledge in this area? And people respond to that. They like, sharing their knowledge and helping you move things forward. So take advantage. And then follow a standard, sort of standard process for doing your market research. It's better to plan it out. So this is sort of word for word, which you'll get some of this in your notes. And what are your goals? What are you trying to answer? What's the source, the methodology, the objectives? What are you really trying to do here? What's your plan? How am I going to make it happen? Do I have a budget? Do I want to spend any money on this? Whose money is it? Is it my money? Does it come from the lab? Does my tech transfer office have any money? Where does that come from? What approach do I want to take? What instruments do I want to use? Is this a phone call? Do I go to the conference that's happening next week downtown that has a lot of people there that I think are going to be there or that I want to talk to? How do I want to get in touch with them? Is this an email, phone call, LinkedIn? Think about your approach. Executing your plan, collecting all the information you can, adjusting as you go. You might find out when you're a third of the way into your plan, you're like, whoa, this headed me in the wrong direction. I need to regroup Start over. Let me adjust my goals. I'm going to try again. Your analysis of findings. What kind of analysis do you want to do? Is it statistical analysis? Do you have access to a statistician that can help you work through that if you may yourselves be able to do that? Or is it subjective? You know, half of the people I talk to really like this idea. It's got a number, but it's still sort of a subjective. They really like this idea. And then putting that information, integrating the learnings into your development process and the activities you do moving forward. What are your actionable conclusions? And thinking about this when we were talking about survey design, designing your survey so the answers that you get allow you to have actionable conclusions. And then what are the implications? What does that mean for me? You know, I found out this indication is already overserved. Maybe I need to shift. I found out there's much bigger unmet need in this population than I ever expected. We need to move on this and raise the awareness in the organization that this really needs to happen. What kind of strategic approach do you take after you learn from this? Hear a veteran of the healthcare space and giving advice on what organizations should do when they bring ideas to the table. It's clear vision. Being as clear and focused as you can on what you're doing, that basically understand the clear unmet need. Be as clear as you can about what market you're trying to approach. Who are the patients, physicians, payers, providers? What's the regulatory climate? How does that all fit together so that you can be as clear as possible in describing your situation? And and then from there, take all those learnings to move forward. So